Welcome back to Tales of the Trail. I'm Aryeh Green, the author of My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land. We're here on Radio Militz, on radio and video. You can click on the link below if you're interested in the video. And today, actually, I'm doing something a little bit different. Thank you for joining us. The sixth segment of this series called Tales of the Trail, where basically I'm recounting some of the experiences of hiking the Israel National Trail, 700 miles, which I did a number of years ago all alone at age 51 with a 50-pound pack on my back, which, of course, those of you who've been following along the series know already, but for those of you just joining us, was quite an experience, and I've been really privileged to be able to relate on behalf of Militz the experiences, the lessons that I learned, people I've met, and the appreciation that I've gained for the land of Israel, our history, the geography, and of course the people. So thank you for joining us, and we're basically here in this sixth segment continuing on a conversation that we started last week about gratitude. But you can see I'm already doing something a bit different. I promised to get out on the trail, and for those of you who are listening and not watching, I'm actually standing in a forest. You can see behind me the trees and the hills of the foothills of the Judean mountains. I'll describe in a second where I am. But I promised I would actually do this and get out on the trail. The difficulties or challenges of the Corona period and heat waves and rain before that kind of prevented me from doing what I had planned to do all along, which was to do many of these segments actually physically out on the trail. And so today's going to be a little bit different, both because if you're watching, you'll see that it's a handheld camera with no tripod and therefore a little bit more movement than usual. And if you're watching or listening, you'll also see, as opposed to other segments that I've done, I'm not going to be putting in pictures or videos from the trail itself, because here we are on the Israel Trail. And what you can see if you're watching behind me in the forest is looking south, and I'll describe it for those of you listening on the radio. We're in a forest ridge right near a place called Mitzpeh Masua, which is one of the forest lookouts, forest fire lookouts dotting the ridges of the Jerusalem hills. You can almost see, if I walk a few steps away, yes you can, the hills of the southern Judean range, and actually going down to the Hebron hills, the hills of Hebron. You can actually see, if you zoom in directly east or east-southeast of us, the communities of Gush Etzion. And the Israel Trail comes up here through this forested way and heads then north towards Beit Shemesh, which is my home, as you'll know if you follow these episodes, and then heads up to Jerusalem, which we'll get to in a few different segments ahead. But so last week I promised an interesting exploration of putting some of the pieces together, and I felt that doing that here at Mitzpeh Masua in the Jerusalem foothills would be actually kind of nice to be able to both visualize or hear it. Those of you on the radio, you can hear now some of the bugs in the background, a helicopter overhead, a little bit of obviously the birds as they come and go. But let's just get right into it, because as I described in the last episode, I had experienced in the northern Negev a very powerful sense of gratitude, which combined with the acceptance and the humility that I had learned earlier in the quiet of the desert. I want to describe a particular experience I had there in the desert. I wish I could have driven down and actually reenacted it for you in this radio and video program, but I'll describe it, and there is something of the quiet even here in the more forested area, which hopefully will add to my ability to relay the experience. And then towards the end of this segment, I'll describe a meditative practice which I developed over the course of those first few weeks of the trail, which as I say combined these three elements I mentioned at the very, very end of the last segment: the humility, the acceptance, and the gratitude. The experience that I want to relate is, those of you who followed before will recognize my description of the quiet of the desert being an incredibly powerful influence within the context of the experiences that I was having in terms of my ability to make sense of the difficulties that I was facing, the personal challenges that I was facing in my life, the divorce that I had just gone through. And that silence of the desert really gave a lot of time for contemplation, for reflection. And in fact, what I'd like to do as I begin to describe the very powerful experience I had is to actually have you walk with me now along the trail. And I'm going to walk, in fact, I'm going to walk south on the trail. And although those of you viewing can see forest around me, I want to focus on the dirt, as it were, if you can see behind me, the dirt of the path. And those of you listening can just know that that the steps that you can hear in the dirt are reminiscent, if you will. They remind me of the quiet and the repetition. Just hearing your steps, minute after minute, hour after hour. As you trudge through a hot and dry desert. Now I'm doing this quietly on purpose. I know that's unusual for the radio. So you can get a bit of a feel. Imagine doing that hour after hour, literally day after day. I want to show you as I begin to describe this experience. Here we are on the trail, and here is, for those of you watching, I'm showing a sign, the Israel Trail marking, which is always a welcome sign as you're walking, so you know you haven't lost your way. Well, I want you to imagine at this point, not if you're watching what you're looking at now, the trees in the background. If you're listening or if you're watching, close your eyes and imagine flat or almost flat rolling hillocks, if you will, but of rock and desert, dry stones, gray stones, light brown dirt, interspersed with black stones, an image which I think I shared in one of the previous segments. This is the Judean Desert Nature Reserve. Funny enough, most people don't know, visitors to Israel, even long-time visitors to Israel, that the largest in terms of its area size nature reserve in Israel is called the Judean Desert Nature Reserve. Have you ever heard of it? Most people haven't. In fact, nobody has. I've never asked that question. People have heard of the Judean Desert, but not the nature reserve called the Judean Desert. This is a national park, I think, or a nature reserve. And there's a reason that nobody's ever heard of it. Nobody ever goes there. There's nothing there. Literally. I said imagine an expanse of these rolling kind of dirt, rocky, very, very low hillocks. Literally, it's a moonscape. This was the first day. If you followed along the earlier segments, you know that even in the driest desert, I would see, some birds, ants, beetles, a few shrubs here and there, a little sign of living, of life, even if it was plant life, here in the Judean Desert, just south of Arad. I had one of the most powerful experiences in the entire trek. And that's partially because there was literally nothing there. I call it a moonscape because I just have no other way to describe it. I walked for 8 hours through this expansive nothingness, really. And in that time period, in that day, I had a powerfully transformative experience, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. I don't think it's a surprise. I don't think it's that surprising that so many of our prophetic and revelatory experiences in our tradition occurred in the desert. I mentioned this in one of my previous segments, because whether it was the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, which is in the desert, of course, whether it's the experiences of Eliyahu, the still small voice that he heard on the mountaintop at Mount Sinai, whether it was King David writing Psalms, escaping to the Judean desert. So many of the prophets of our people found solace, found revelation, found meaning, found connection to something higher than ourselves in the desert. And I think one of the reasons for that, certainly for me, was with a lack of distraction, with no birds, with no shrubbery, with no trees, there was just nothing else to distract you. And somehow I found that, and I read about this a bit in the book. I don't want to wax too hyperbolic, but I found myself in that kind of nothingness connecting to everything in the universe. In other words, I made this leap of, here I am in the midst of nothing, and yet I feel part of everything. And I felt closer to God and the universe and humanity than perhaps I had done ever in my life. And that day for me was transformative in so many ways. One of them was reaching really the fulfillment of this process that I described in the last few segments, based on a sense of humility and my place in this universe of nothingness, giving me perspective on my problems, combined with this acceptance that this is reality, and I'm going to have to deal with it, and the gratitude that I had begun to develop for all the blessings in my life. Somehow all of that came together and literally enabled me to move forward as I walked, and I'll walk again now as I talk, as I walked through that vast expansiveness of nothingness in the Judean desert, in that nature reserve. I felt like a weight had lifted. I came towards the end of that day, still for the next another 2 hours in the desert there, and did something I haven't done in, I guess, 30 years. I hadn't done in 30 years, and that was, I wrote a song. Well, the truth is, what I did is I rewrote a song. I took a song that I had written 30 years ago, and added new words and a new verse, a new chorus, some new elements to it. But the point is not the structure of the song and the mechanisms or the content of it. The fact is, it was the first time that I had felt myself able to write a song, to write music. My heart was uplifted in a way that really surprised me. And I described in the segment before how, I grew up in California. This is my element. I love forests, not deserts. And yet I had this transformative and powerful experience in the desert, I think precisely because the challenge was given, was accepted, that I was with myself and with no one else, and that I was in a vast expanse of, I've called it nothingness, but of a void almost of life, and therefore I was kind of forced to bring life back, to bring myself back to life. And the writing of a song, and it was a joyous and uplifting song, which, no, I'm not going to sing for you. You can see the words of it in my book, or if you're really interested, you can write to me and I'll send you a recording, because I did record it. And there's somewhere on YouTube a video of it, but I don't think it's public. I hope it's not. So that was the end of my desert experience, and the transformation that occurred in me was phenomenal and as I say, incredibly powerful. What was interesting was that the transformation also from an acceptance to gratitude, and combining these three things, humility, acceptance, and gratitude, was accompanied by a transformation in geography. And that's why I found hiking the land of Israel and the Israel Trail so overwhelmingly emotional and meaningful, because at that point then, coming up to Arad and going from Arad over to Sansana and Haram Masa to Sansana up into the Lachish region, which is basically just south of here, just south, literally as the crow flies. I'm going to walk a little bit to see if I can give you a bit more of a view, those of you who are watching. Was a geographical transformation from desert, from dry desert nothingness of the Judean Desert Nature Reserve, but also the dry hills and valleys that you've seen or have described in the last few segments in the Negev, into the green forest area of the Judean hills. And that geographical transformation accompanied me and I guess made even more powerful. It augmented the emotional transformation that I was going through on the hike. I remember hiking through the forest of Yatir, which perhaps in the next segment I'll show a video which I did of me from the back hiking through the forest of Yatir. This was the first forest I'd seen in three weeks. Not quite as lush as this that I'm standing in, but close enough to get the feeling and appreciate the difference between the desert environment and the hills. Now, as I move into the next part of this segment, I'm actually going to change the camera so that instead of looking at me, I can show the vista that I'm looking at, and hopefully give a little bit more of a perspective. For those of you not watching but rather listening on the radio, I'll just note as I switch it, I think I can do this as I'm recording. This is an experiment, and I hope that everybody's enjoying the difficulties that I'm having. Now, I don't seem to be able to switch it, and that's okay. So I'll keep myself in the frame, doing the selfie shot. I'm now pointing a little bit more north, where you can see these are the hills of Jerusalem, which I'm pointing to. These are the hills over there, basically is Beit Shemesh, looking north again, for those of you listening and not watching. There are a few army officers here, apparently planning out a drill. I can't quite see, and therefore can't show you, the coastal plain, which is to the west. I'm going to walk over here and see if we can see that, because the reason I'm pointing that out is that this particular area, which is relatively near my home in Beit Shemesh, as I mentioned, is itself kind of a meeting point of the coastal plain, the Judean hills, and the northern Negev. You can see through the trees a little bit some of the lower foothills reaching out to the coastal plain, but that's not so important, I suppose. What is important is a recognition that not only was I leaving the desert and coming into kind of more a verdant forest area with fields and wheat fields and fields of flowers and other vegetation, obviously agricultural region. I was also coming close to home. I was pointing out just now how near we are to Beit Shemesh, my home. And in fact, I spent about a week, I think I called that chapter in the book, about gratitude, circumnavigating home. Because literally, you walk up, going north from this area to just before Beit Shemesh, the Elah Valley, which we'll cover perhaps in the next segment, and then up the hills to Jerusalem, and then from Jerusalem down, and we'll definitely do a segment, I think, at the Mishlatim, the hills leading up to Jerusalem, which played a very important role in the 1948 war, and the Israel Trail goes right through them. But this is literally going around Beit Shemesh, my home, and I spent that a good week or 10 days hiking towards and around Beit Shemesh without going home, which itself is a story which we'll come back to. The other thing I wanted to share with you in this segment, though, before we get into those elements of kind of the next steps of the journey, was something that I learned and practiced, and I think I can even demonstrate here in the quiet of this trail, even though it's not in the desert, which, as I said earlier, combines these issues of humility, acceptance, and gratitude. I want to share with you a meditative practice, which actually I discovered on a retreat in the hills. I love the fact that we're doing this also in video, because I can show you. I already showed you that right up there that I'm pointing to in the hills behind me to the east is Gush Etzion. For our radio listeners, I'm pointing east from these hills up into the hills of the southern Jerusalem hills, or the northern Hebron hills, where you can actually see some of the Gush Etzion communities, one of which is called Bat Ayin. And I spent a wonderful long weekend, a silent meditation weekend, soon after the wedding of my son, which was a year after my wife had said that she wanted a divorce, and a good almost a year before we finalized the divorce. But it was clear at that point that it was becoming serious, and that it was going to happen. And I had spent many days, hours talking, as you can imagine, to friends, family, to my former wife, to therapists, different therapists, and I was kind of done talking, I think is the way I've described it in the past. And having then felt that I kind of talked myself out, the idea of a silent meditation retreat was a very welcome diversion, if you will. And I went on this silent meditation retreat in Bat Ayin, and it was really a wonderful and powerful experience, and tremendously enjoyable as well, and very different. Even though I am Californian, it was not something that I had really pursued. I did some Zen sitting in high school and college, but nothing of this magnitude of 3 days of literally not speaking, meditating, singing, walking. And I learned some very interesting techniques, including one which was basically walking silent meditation. And I ended up developing a meditative practice which accompanied me for the entire trail, something that I did every morning. I did it before my tefillot, before my prayers every morning, and it was something that also I used when I wanted to or needed to in the course of the walk itself, in terms of the repetitive nature of the walk. Basically, it encompasses these three concepts that I've been discussing in all the segments until now. Humility and acceptance and gratitude. And it's based on a very simple mantra, if you will. Many of you know, listening or watching, that one of the names of God, in fact, the first time that God describes himself to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, he says in a very obscure and difficult to translate phrase, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which is often mistranslated, I will be what I will be, but it's not that, because Ehyeh is not necessarily in the future tense, it's also in the present tense in biblical Hebrew, a verb for existence. Asher is a conjunction, it's a connecting word. It can mean many things. So Ehyeh asher ehyeh could be I am what I am as I am what I will be as I can be. Basically, it's an expression, in my very humble interpretation, it's an expression of existence. I exist, I am existence. For me, that experience I described just recently in the desert was a connection to that existence. And having developed this meditative practice based on that phrase, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, made it all the more powerful. Now, what this meditative practice is, I'm going to demonstrate it and it's on the video, but I'll describe also if you're just listening on the radio. It's a walking meditative practice, and it basically is it combines taking a step and saying this phrase to yourself. It could be out loud. I do it quietly as you're taking the step. And for me, the connection between lifting up your foot and passing over into the next step. I'm going to put the camera down so that perhaps you can see as I'm taking a step. Lifting up your foot and that period when it's in the air before it comes down, to me represents that word asher that's in between. Ehyeh, asher, ehyeh. That's in between, that is the connection. That is this pivotal point where we don't know where we're going. This kind of inflection point between past and future, which is passive but it's active because you're hanging in the air between steps, but you're moving from one step to another. And I also felt, and I read about this a bit in the book, that it's indefinable. Nobody quite knows exactly that point of inflection when your weight goes from your transfers from your back foot to your front foot. And I've always felt that moment, that indefinable moment of pivot, of the weight going from back to front, is representative of that asher in the beginning, in the middle of those two expressions of existence. There's an existence, there's another existence, and there's the asher, the what, the as, the if, the and that's in between the two. And for me as a meditative practice, to say literally asher, to say ehyeh with one foot before it moves forward, and then asher as the balance transfers to the front foot, ehyeh as you step down on the next step, is a very calming, centering practice, which I found very helpful within the context of understanding that expression, ehyeh, asher, ehyeh, I will be what I will be. It is what it is. This is reality. I am reality. God is reality. We are all part of this reality. For me, that was a very important element of the acceptance, based on this humility of understanding my place in the universe, which I found very, very helpful. And in the desert, it really came into its own as a meditative practice. I'm just going to do it, I see that our time is running out shortly. I'm going to do it very quickly, just to share with you the experience a few times in the quiet, and then I'll describe the second practice, and then we'll close. Ehyeh, asher, ehyeh. Ehyeh, asher, ehyeh. Ehyeh, asher, ehyeh. Ehyeh, asher, ehyeh. And that was something that I would do for 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time. And I still do with some frequency. And I'm very humbled and pleased to share it with those of you who are still listening or watching. And I hope that it can be somewhat helpful, perhaps, to you as well as a quiet, contemplative, meditative practice that enables us to reflect on our place in the universe. I want to quickly move on, since our time is running out, to the second practice, which immediately followed that in my morning tefillah and my morning prayers, and that is to do something very similar in a walking meditation, but using different words. And these two words are words that have accompanied me for most of my life, and relate specifically to this third element of gratitude, and that is what we say when we wake up in the morning, traditional Jews say, Modeh ani lifanecha, melech chai v'kayam. I am so thankful to you, to God, to the everlasting and eternal God, for my life and for bringing me back from sleep. And I would use the same practice, but this time with the words Modeh ani, I am thankful. After accepting the reality of the world that I'm facing and that I'm living in, I would then say Modeh ani. Modeh ani. Modeh ani. Modeh ani. Each time taking a step with the pivotal point, that inflection point in between those two words of Modeh and ani. And now I think that you can understand what I've kind of been leading up to in the last two segments of this incredibly meaningful connection between the humility that I learned in the desert, the acceptance that I learned also in the desert, and the gratitude that was just deepened in me as I walked through the northern Negev, through the Judean desert, and then into these Jerusalem hills, and developed these meditative practices, which I had developed earlier, but which I expanded on, and which became even more meaningful in the course of that part of the hike. These revelations, if you will, these realizations, the deepening of my sense of appreciation, the deepening of my sense of acceptance, the deepening of my sense of humility, were a very, very big part of my Israel Trail experience. And I thank you for listening and for watching and for joining me. This is my Israel Trail, and I hope you'll join us for the next segment, where we start to hike up the Jerusalem hills, and hopefully I'll record the next one actually on one of the segments of the Israel Trail there in the Jerusalem hills. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.